We'll be getting started here in a little bit, giving everyone a chance to join. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yep.
Can everyone hear me okay?
Yep.
Thanks. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yep.
Thanks. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yep.
Thanks. Okay. Can you still hear me? I was going to try to use YouTube to stream with also, but that's echo and a loop was getting annoying. So Got a couple more that should be joining here soon. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Some people, a couple of people in here have probably seen most of this presentation before, but my first day of class, we cover an introduction to web app pen testing, which this is one of the talks I do at conferences. So those of you that are new that don't know me, I'm a principal penetration tester at a bank. I've been pen testing for over 7.5 years. I'm an adjunct instructor at Richland College, teaching ethical hacking web app pen testing. I am the founder of the Pwning School Project. I'm a Bug Crowd Ambassador and the 2019 Ambassador of the Year. And each semester for the ethical hacking class, the web app pen testing class, I always like to share with students to make sure you have permission before you do any kind of pen testing or ethical hacking, because hacking without permission is illegal. So you want to make sure, even better yet, you have written permission. This is best done through home labs or bug bounties. Tell my students each semester to get experience with bug bounties and home labs and CTFs. And if you're working in a bug bounty, doing a bug bounty, you're actually doing a web app pen test. So as you work through these, when you go through a technical interview, you can explain how to find certain vulnerabilities and how to conduct a pen test. So this is a really good experience. So for this talk, we're going to go over, there's this virtual environment that we'll be using for class. For the labs, we're going to go over a web app pen testing overview, methodology, tools, and some further learning resources in there. But this semester, since this talk was kind of revised for conferences, so the further learning you're actually getting the education in the class, and some of the resources I'll share in class or in this lecture also what we'll be using in class. And so Well, I'll share the slides with everyone so you can see how to set up your lab environment. But basically, this lab is Kali Linux, and it's got Dockerized web applications, vulnerable web applications installed on that image. And I came up with this idea through, I saw a tool out there, actually a VM, I think it was by Security Maven, and it was all in one environment. Because a lot of times when you're setting up these environments, trying to get get more than one VM to connect sometimes can cause problems. So I created this with all the vulnerable apps on there. So in a workshop setting, people wouldn't have to spend a lot of time trying to get those VMs to connect. So on here is the core Kali Linux pen testing tools, Burp Suite Community Edition, OWASP Zap, Arachne, which is a web application vulnerability scanner. This is just kind of to give you, an idea of some other vulnerability web app vulnerability scanners. A lot of the commercial ones are too expensive, but I need to check with Portswigger because last semester they gave me Burp Suite licenses for the class. So all works out well. We should have commercial licenses to use during the class. And also in this on the image, we have a proxy switcher set up and also user agent switcher. And we have two different browsers set up. Chrome is intended to use with Arachne, since it's used through a browser, and also Firefox is intended for Burp Suite and Zap. So you can use those because if you're running the Arachne web app vulnerability scanner, it uses a different port, so it's easier just to use Chromium for Arachne and then Firefox for your manual testing as well as for Burp Suite and Zap. And there's also in Cherry Tree, there's some notes on how to start and stop this pen test lab script and Arachne. And there's bookmarks for the vulnerable app to make it easier to find those. But as you launch the applications, they will give you the URL. So you can also navigate it that way. The 8 vulnerable apps that are on here is Buggy Web App, WebGoat 7.1, and 8.0, Damn Vulnerable Web App, Matilda 2, OWASP Juice Shop, WP Scan. It's a vulnerable web WordPress installation, so you can test. This lets you run tests and look for vulnerabilities against WordPress, and then OpenDNS secured by Security Ninjas. And all these are Dockerized images on this vulnerable, on this VM. And this page will show you how to start and stop the different VMs, the different Docker images. You can have them all running at once or one at a time. For this class, probably best to run one at a time as you practice with the different vulnerable apps. And the location for those scripts, if you go into the root of the Kali root directory, you'll see the Pentest Lab directory for those scripts. And then for the Arachne, I create a start script so you don't have to navigate out to other directories to launch it, or I didn't go through the trouble of setting up a link in Linux where you could just execute it that way. I just kind of did it the easy way, but that makes it a little bit easier to start that up. I don't know that you'll want to use that much, but it's good to at least go through and run it against the application once to see how it works. And web app pen testing overview. Pen testing or penetration testing assesses security from a malicious actor's perspective and can find vulnerabilities otherwise not possible. Pen testing is often referred to as ethical hacking. Sometimes this is an easier way to describe it because most people that don't work in the field, they hear penetration testing, they're kind of confused with what you're talking about, or pen testing, they think you work for an ink pen factory testing ink pens. But so you also hear pen testing referred to as offensive security as well. And web app pen testing skills are helpful in roles such as application security analyst, generalist pen testers, and application pen testers. As more companies get their systems secure and the endpoint protections they're using, a lot of times is making it harder for a pen tester to get in. So sometimes the only way to get in to the system to hack into anything is using web apps, IoT, or wireless. As the new technologies come out, then they're not as secure as other technologies on the network. So sometimes these give you a way to get in. And even as a generalist pen tester, you need to know some kind of web app pen testing, and because you're going to run across some system that's using some kind of web administrator portal for that system. And the different types of tests, and this is based on the knowledge of the systems you're testing. You have black box, white box, also referred to as crystal box, and you have gray box. Black box is typically limited to IP addresses. I've done pen tests where we only knew the location of the company. So we only knew the physical address because they wanted their physical security tested. And then we knew the name of the company. So we were able to look through network blocks on the internet to find IP addresses and look for domains to be able to test the external company. So that's limited. That limited information is more similar to the way an attacker would approach it. But these are also time sensitive too, like your white box test. This is more detailed information, a lot of times including accounts. So this gives you more information, whereas when you're going through the black box perspective, then you're having to dig up more of this information through recon. And so the more time you have, the black box testing is a little more reasonable. White box testing for limited time, or applications, because applications you really should test those with credentials, because even an administrator doesn't need to be able to see certain things, and just a lower level user of the application doesn't need to be able to get access to admin functions. And so with these different levels of users, you can see if you can escalate your privileges or try to change accounts and that sort of thing. So that's where the accounts come in handy. The application, as far as trying to break into it, may be really hard. And if you can't get in, there could be vulnerabilities in there that could be exploited. So this makes testing applications a better way. And gray box is kind of a partial knowledge of the target. This is a cross between the other two methods. And this is, in my experience, typically what most pen testers see. You have IP address subnets, you have URLs, and more detailed information. So this is kind of a combination of the two. And web app pen testing methodology. The Penetration Testing Execution Standard, or PTES, is pretty popular. We have a link there. It's there's also another standard, OSTEM, but if I'm correct, I believe you have to pay for a membership to access their information. But the PTES standard, they include this information in the Pentest Plus. So it's a really good place to start out. I mean, I recommend going through this from beginning to end, because it covers the pre-engagement interactions. This is like scoping a pen test, to the intelligence gathering, threat modeling, vulnerability analysis, exploitation, post-exploitation, and report writing. And the nice thing about this standard is it takes you through the different types of pen tests. So that will show you tools needed for wireless pen tests, web app pen tests, and network pen tests. Cover some of the different platforms and tools that you would use. So this is a really good place to learn from. And there's also a tool out there called Dratus that is a collaboration and report generation tool that you can use to write pen test reports with. And the cool thing about it is you can use whatever standard you want to test the application or the network, and it gives you a little checklist to go through. So you can go through that PTES standard and see, okay, have I tested this and this? And it kind of, sometimes even some experienced pen testers can find things in there that they're missing on a pen test. So it's a good way to make sure everything's being covered. But yeah, I would definitely look through that. And your intelligence gathering is very important. The more information you gather there, the more recon, the closer you make a black box to a white box or a gray box. So the more information you reveal, the better. And as far as web app pen testing methodology, more specifically, the OWASP testing guide, version 4.0 is the most current out. And also the Web Application Hackers Handbook, 2nd edition, which is the book we use for this class. The OWASP testing guide is going to be a little less detailed. It's going to give you more information on the testing, whereas the Web Application Hackers Handbook has a methodology within the book, but it's educational, tells you how to do the different types of testing. So we'll be going through these. And one of the other resources we use for this is Portswigger, the company and creator of Burp Suite. One of the authors of this Web Application Hackers Handbook created this. They're also putting, instead of updating to a third edition, they're putting educational content onto their website. So they have this Web Security Academy on there, and it will take you through different types of vulnerabilities and show you how to exploit those and test for those with their online labs. Previously, Portswigger would charge you like $35, or actually, I guess the authors of the book charge you $35 an hour for online labs. And now with this Web Application Security Academy, the labs are free. So they take you through a section, maybe cross-site scripting, and then you have labs to practice what you're learning. And information gathering, also known as OSINT or reconnaissance. This is one of the first steps in the actual penetration test. And OSINT is short for open source intelligence. This is getting more popular as is, there's a lot more tools, methodologies. This is like art in itself, OSINT. When I was getting started, we just refer to it as information gathering or reconnaissance. And you'll hear more people seeing OSINT, since there's so many good tools in the area. One example of an OSINT tool that's very useful is Shodan. I had this pen test I did, side pen test, December of last year. It was a black box test, kind of a more similar to a red team engagement. And I looked up the different network blocks for IP addresses. I got IP address ranges externally, and I got some domain names, but I went through Shodan and searched on the company name, and I was able to find a FTP server that was in Indonesia. And the reason I found it was that the FTP banner had the name of the company within the FTP banner, and Shodan had found that and indexed it in its list of items in it. And so Shodan, good way to look at it is either the pen tester or hackers browser, because you're able to find different vulnerabilities out there. Say some of the popular vulnerabilities, you may be able to find, different websites or technologies online that are vulnerable to those. And just like the asking for permission, even though some of those may be easy to get into, don't be tempted to mess with that, because some of those are up there with default credentials and you can log in, but without permission, you're still breaking the law. So you want to be careful with that. And so search engine discovery for information leakage. This is one that's really popular in bug hunting. And Jason Haddix, formerly with Bug Crowd, this is one of the things he really preached, was search engine discovery for information leakage. So you could find credentials, maybe they've got like the username and password remarked out in the source of the web app, and you may be able to find that information being leaked. All sorts of good information. You could find possibly stuff from people's GitHub or Pastebin where they got information on that application. So search engine discovery is a good place in your methodology. Fingerprinting, so looking for the OS, the web server, and the application frameworks is an important step. You need to know what type of web server they're running or whatever application framework they're running to be able to break into the system. And vulnerability scanning, so we're looking for vulnerabilities on that system to see if there's any of those vulnerabilities that could be exploitable. And then port and service scanning. This is still important because if you're doing your port and service scanning, you could find some abandoned services and applications that are no longer in use. Maybe the current site is IIS and they're running ASPX, but maybe at one time they were running Apache, or they were testing out Apache. And if these sites or these servers or frameworks are left abandoned, then they're probably not being patched. Maybe their password standards were weaker when that was set up. Maybe when they set it up, they used weaker credentials just to make it easier to administer the system. This is going back to looking at the remarks and the content or the source of the content of the web page, because sometimes they may remark out a username and password or something. And sometimes these port and service scans, if you're using like the vuln script, you can possibly find other vulnerabilities and maybe even find that the web server itself is vulnerable, or maybe they're running FTP, clear text FTP. Maybe you're able to brute force log in with that. Maybe they're using weak passwords on SSH. So you don't want to overlook those other ports, even though it's web application. And then you want to test for the OWASP top 10 vulnerabilities. A lot of pen tests you see, the customers typically want like an OWASP top 10 vulnerability test. Although it's not the only ones you test for, but it's definitely, you want to make sure to include those. And web app pen testing tools, your web application vulnerability scanner is also known as DAST, or dynamic application security testing. Two very popular ones are IBM AppScan and Fortify Web Inspect. These are the first two I had experience with. And then a couple of the newer ones is NetSparker and Acunetics. AppScan and Fortify Web Inspect are pretty expensive. If I'm not mistaken, they were like around $8,000 to $10,000, whereas NetSparker and Acunetics, $5,000 to $2,500 range, and Arachne is free. And you can also use like Burp Suite. The commercial version has a vulnerability scanner built in, as well as Zap does. And then for your static code analysis, you use SAST tools, which are static application security testing tools. This you're testing your source code, and a couple products out there, Veracode and Fortify. Although Veracode also does some dynamic testing, but you can also do static code analysis, and also with Fortify. So it's a good idea in your system, your security, your software development lifecycle, to make sure that security is part of that life cycle. So it's a good idea to do static source code analysis against those applications and before they're actually published. And interception proxies like Burp Suite and Zap have become really popular in most consultants. And when I got out of consulting to go to work for a bank, the company I work for, we're only using Burp Suite. And so I see less companies using the expensive scanners, plus a lot of the tools like AppScan and Web Inspect. They give you a lot of false positives, so you can spend hours and hours trying to go through and clean up these false positives. And SQL Map is another good tool that I recommend. This one is good for SQL injection testing. When I find SQL injection vulnerabilities, I use this to validate whether it's a false positive or not. And another tool that sometimes gets overlooked, but I've had pretty good luck with, is Nikto. It's an open source web server scanner. I've found credentials and information that allowed me to be able to exploit the login of a system that stuff like Nessus or other tools missed during the vulnerability scan. And so that's also a good idea, to use multiple tools. So to make sure you're switching back and forth between, not really switching back and forth, but using a combination. I've seen companies, and this is not web application specific, but an example is using Nessus and then maybe using OpenVAS, the two different vulnerability scanners, to see if you find something different. I've done pen tests where, you'd find something with Nessus, but maybe Rapid7 Nexpose didn't find it. So using multiple tools is a good way to find things you might otherwise miss, even tools like Nikto. And network pen testing of web apps. So you want to make sure you're testing that infrastructure. You may have, your code could be secure and all that, the actual application could be secure, but then maybe there's something on there that's not secure as far as the network goes. So using tools like Nessus or other vulnerability scanners and Nmap, like Nmap earlier, we mentioned the service scans and port scans. Nmap's a good tool for that. And this could help uncover the unused and abandoned services or applications like I previously mentioned. So you want to make sure that infrastructure that you're putting your application on is secure. And there's like an interesting story as far as SQL injection. One of my favorite all-time hacks I was doing when I was working as a consultant. I was doing a web application pen test, and it was interesting enough. This was internet facing, so through a SQL injection vulnerability, I was able to get command line access to the server. I was running Burp Suite and discovered from the vulnerability scan, I discovered a SQL injection vulnerability. And what SQL injection does is it allows an attacker to inject code directly to a SQL syntax to the back end, to that web server. So you could either, some cases if the permission is not set right, if it's not secure, you could inject data into that database, or download data, or delete the database. And so while I was doing my vulnerability scan with Burp Suite, I noticed that there was a SQL injection vulnerability. And one of my favorite Burp Suite plugins is CO2. It allows you to run SQL map, one of the many things it does, but it allows you to run SQL map through Burp Suite. So if you find your injection point, you can right click it, send it to SQL map, and then SQL map will run through and perform different tests against there, trying to inject information and testing for vulnerabilities. So it tested out as positive. So I was able to, I did recognize and discover it was running the XP command shell. So I was able to get command line access to the server, and I was able to dump the hash and then crack it with John the Ripper, which John the Ripper is pretty slow, but to just go show how weak the password was, John the Ripper cracked it in like 30 seconds, and the password was all lowercase #1. You always hear these stories, or you go to conferences and you see that, and this stuff is really still happening in the real world. You run into weak passwords like that, and then some companies will use the season and the year for the passwords. And some people on here that's taken the ethical hacking class will see each semester when they send out the labs. Yep, Kevin said fall 2019 exclamation point. Yeah, you'll see a lot of that. And Carlos, yeah, CO2 should be available. Yeah, CO2 is available in Burp Suite Community Edition. That's the one thing about Community Edition with Burp Suite. You're limited on some of the plugins, and that's not just because they wrote the plugins not to work for people who don't have the pro version. It just needs the functionality of the pro version to actually run those plugins. And these next couple slides here show how to start up the vulnerable apps on there. So we will go through next our lab VM and show you how to navigate that and start it up, as well as demonstrate a few tools on it.